Hello and welcome to the Analyst Inside Cricket with me, Simon Hughes.
And I'm Simon Mann.
And this is a special episode. In fact, it's two parts of a podcast talking about batting. And we have a special guest who's a real aficionado on this subject, Jared Kimber. Jared, the writer, broadcaster, and I suppose you call stats guru. You've written a book, The Art of Batting, The Craft of Cricket's Greatest Run Makers. Very interesting book, fantastic amount of detail in it. It's coming out on May the 8th, and the second part of this podcast will be time to launch it. But we thought we'd talk generally about the art of batting today. And it's great to have you on, Jared, and thanks for sort of putting so much effort into this book. It's full of intriguing revelations and stories and obviously stats as well. But in your title there, you say the art of batting, the craft of cricket's greatest run makers. So is there a difference between batting and run making?
Yeah, I think there is. I think it's weird writing a book like this and coming on your podcast, and the first thing I'm going to talk about is Zach Crawley. But I think there is an issue with Zach Crawley. I don't think he has a problem batting. I think he understands how to bat, and he's been very well trained, and he understands the art of a throwdown, and he gets on top of the bounce when he drives because he's a tall player. He obviously has an incredible eye and everything else. But I don't think anyone would argue that Zach Crawley is a good run maker, right? Like, he occasionally explodes with batting genius, but then he goes back to he doesn't know how to graft runs on the other side. And one thing that I really wanted to talk about in this book was, you know, we get very excited with pretty batting, right? And we get very excited with genius batting, right? But just the ability to make runs every day, I think sometimes is overlooked. And there's a couple of really old English players that I think are overlooked because they are seen as boring batters who just knock the ball around and do the right things over and over again. You've got Barrington and Hobbs and Hutton. I think we'd all put in that. And I'm like, but their job was to make as many runs as possible, right? And at the end of the day, we could talk about how beautiful a player is or how game-changing a player is, but the game is literally how many runs did you win by? You know, how many did you score more runs than the opposition? And so I really wanted that to be an important part of it. I didn't want this to be full of the sexiest batters, right? Or the most skillful batters. I wanted it to be the people who understood how to make a run in a tough situation. And Kumar Sangakkara was brilliant sort of on that sort of topic of like, every time I went out there, I tried to play an innings that was like the right innings for that period of time. That isn't what all great players have done, and that isn't what all batters do, right? Some batters go out and, you know, they've got their method, and if it doesn't work that day, it doesn't work. That's very different, right? There's a very different skill there. So I do think there's a difference between being very good at batting and having the physical and mental skills available to pick up a ball very early and, you know, the reflexes and all those things, and then the skill of, it's not working for me today, I'm going to have to do that all the way through. And I think Mark Waugh said it perfectly for me. And Mark Waugh, you know, I think we've all heard him commentate. He can be quite a caustic when he wants to, but he's talking about Alistair Cook, and he's really honest. And he just says, I couldn't do what Alistair Cook does. I don't have that in me. So Alistair Cook might not be as good a batter as Mark Waugh, but he's a better run scorer. Right. And that was, so I wanted to be fair to both of those different disciplines. And the greatest players of all time have both, right?
We should make it clear, actually, at the start that you have selected kind of like your top 50 players, and that will probably create some debate. And you put them in sections, and you put your top 3 of all time, which might create some debate as well. But we are not going to focus on the top 50 today. In fact, in the second podcast, we will look at the top 50. So listen out for that one when we actually get to the detail of those players. We talk about batting in general a bit more in this podcast. So you've called it the art of batting. What about like the idea of the science of batting? You know, I think of, you know, the art of batting sort of conjures up an idea. Actually, you kind of put it to bed a little bit with that first answer. And it's about run scoring. You know, you think of players like Jonathan Trott, for example, who would go out and hit ball after ball after ball after ball after ball and sort of groove a particular shot. So why is the book called The Art of Batting and not perhaps The Science of Batting or The Art and Science of Batting?
I suppose if I went art and science, it would be too similar to Bob Woolmer's book at that point, a little bit. And maybe it's too similar in title to Mike Brearley's book about captaincy as well. I think for me, there is a real science to it, and I understand that. But one thing that I've been talking about quite a bit with this book of recent times is we've never had two great batters follow each other in the same family, right? So if it was just science, right, Arjun Tendulkar wouldn't be bowling medium left arm swing for Mumbai Indians. He'd be a batter, right? Like, it'd be interesting to see what you guys think of this. But in my research, I would say that the two best father and son combinations in batting history are probably Hanif Mohammed and his son Shoaib, and the Mandrakers. Obviously, Sanjay being the more famous one now, but Vijay being the much better batter. And Shoaib Mohammed and Sanjay Manjrekar are top quality players, like really good international level players, but they're not great. Yet they have the same genetics of someone else in the list. And I don't think there's any brothers in this list either. Spoiler if you're looking for Ian Chappell or Mark Waugh.
Wars. No Mark Waugh then. I know Steve Waugh's in the list. Mark
Yeah.
Waugh didn't make it. Oh, interesting.
Mark Waugh was really honest, actually. He was like, yeah, I probably didn't quite get the most out of myself. So he was, but
I'd
so
agree with
there's
that.
obviously a physical thing, because we all know that the entire country of New Zealand is people related to each other in cricket, and Ireland and Papua New Guinea. There's all these different places in the world where people are related. So there is a genetics part of it. But I remember Brian Lara talking about the fact that he played this game with his brother over and over again, about how they would both open the face and close the face to make sure that they wouldn't hit pot plants. And that's how Brian Lara became the great placer of a cricket ball. Well, his brother played that, right? And they have the same genetics. So there has to be something beyond just the pure science of it. Otherwise, we would be able to breed a great batter, right? We would be able to make a batter appear from nothing. And what Rahul Dravid told me was that at a certain point, so much of batting is subconscious, right? And it's about clues that even when he's trying to help a really top-level batter, right? Rahul Dravid is really conscious that if he says the wrong thing, he might actually drop them down a level again. Right. So much of it is that there is a art to it, and the hovering front foot and all this sort of stuff, Simon, which is more the science of it. We can tell any batter in the world that you have to have a hovering front foot, that you can't plant your front foot down or you can't stay on the back foot. But if you tell the person when the front foot needs to hover and they're facing 90 miles an hour, that's when the art comes back into it. Right. So there always has to be a combination of that. We can break cricket down block by block, but we have never managed to manufacture, the difference between, Yoza and you and me, Simon, is we can both see a cricket ball coming towards us at 70 miles an hour. Once it gets over 75 miles an hour, we don't have the ability to jump with our eyes and predict the path of the ball. And no one can teach anyone to do that.
You obviously never watched Yoza bat, Jared.
Well, I mean, he could hold a bat.
Yeah, I could hold that. I mean, actually, yeah. I did that test myself, and I was proved to be a lot slower, that you won't be surprised to know, than Nick Compton. So I did a test with Compo, and we both put these special cameras on which filmed our retina and what we were looking at. We faced the same bowler who was probably bowling 80 miles an hour in the indoor nets. And I found that my eye was slightly behind the ball as it came down, and Compo's eyes were slightly ahead of the ball as it came down. He was still playing top-class cricket at the time, and I'd retired. So, it was a bit of a kind of unequal test in a way. But actually, I think, funnily enough, over time, I could see the ball when Alan Donald bowled it. I could definitely see it, and I could follow it, but I couldn't hit it.
Yeah.
Or at least I couldn't attack it. I could probably defend it, but I wasn't. I remember actually batting with Dean Jones once for Durham, and Curtly Ambrose hated Dean Jones for various reasons, perfectly legitimate ones. And so Ambrose was absolutely storming into bowling this ferocious stuff. And Jones would just get rocked back on the back foot with a ball lifting off a length at sort of 88 miles an hour and just cuff it backward a point for a single, because they'd set the man back on the one to obviously expose me to the strike, because I was number 10. And, the same ball from Ambrose, I would sort of flail at and it would fly through to the keeper. Jones was just easing it backward a square for one. And that was when I was playing professional cricket. So even though I had experienced a lot of those fantastic fast bowlers, I just didn't have that extra ability to be able to actually do something with that ball. And that's where that's where you separate the wheat from the chaff, I suppose, is those, it's about a sixth sense, isn't it? The batters. I mean, you made the point in your chapter called I about the fact that you can't follow a 90-mile-an-hour ball all the way through. So you have to kind of almost premeditate where it is at certain points in its path. And the best players are able to do that almost subconsciously.
Yeah, and I think the subconscious thing is really important, because when I talk to some players, they were, especially current players, they were like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. I don't want to deconstruct what I do because I'm afraid I won't be able to rebuild it anymore. So there is a very subconscious part of it. But I think the first test of a great player was Callis. So I think I joke in the book that Bob Woolmer might have made Callis in a science lab, right? Because but with Callis, they would turn the lights off and Callis would still be in the right position every time. He might not always hit the ball, but he can't see the ball, and he's still forward defense, bat next to pad, roughly where the ball is coming, whereas the very good amateur cricketers couldn't do that. And I think, Yoza, what you're talking about is, look at Imran Khan, maybe you put Dan Vettori in this sort of list, and maybe even someone like Ravi Jadeja. I think over time, if you're in professional cricket and you're really diligent, you can get slightly better at batting. So Glenn McGrath, by the end of his career, could hold a bat. At the start of his career, didn't know which end to pick up, right? But we've never really seen a transformation in a player who couldn't bat to someone who is at that level of great through a period of time, unless they had the original skills.
I mean, I would just contend possibly Sangakkara was able to do that, because he admitted, and like you, I've interviewed him about this, and I've spent time with him in his home actually in Kandy originally, and he talks about the fact that aged, I don't know, 21, when he was a keeper, he batted at sort of 7 or 8, and he wasn't that good. But he taught himself to bat. I think he was hugely influenced by his father, and his father used to get out the Bradman's Art of Cricket book and show him various positions that Bradman got into, and told him off the shots he played yesterday and things like that. But Sangakkara made himself into this amazing player. And you made the point in your book, actually, that he's the only player who's made 2,000 runs after the age of 35 at an average of 60. Only player in history to have done that. Amazing.
Yeah, but I also talked to a bunch of people who grew up with Sanga.
Right.
Because he sort of said the same thing that he told you, and they were like, no.
He was over modest, was he really, do you think?
Not over modest. I do think he was someone who continually got better, but there was no one who saw him when he was young who didn't think he had that level of ceiling, right? So what I'm talking about is Imran Khan averages 50 from 1982 to 1992 in Test cricket. And all three of us have watched Imran Khan bat. None of us think of Imran Khan as a great batter. What we thought about was someone who discovered a method to score runs and stay in. Imran Khan, the great not outer, right? Like his ability to be not out. And Jadeja is very similar. Watch Jadeja bat. He doesn't think like a normal batter, right? I would even put someone like Ben Stokes is very interesting in this as well. They don't just go through the gears like a batter, go up, go down, go sideways. They sort of come up with a method that works for the next half an hour, right? And you'll see Jadeja sometimes. He will just sit there and just dead bat for half an hour. Right. And then he goes, okay, so I've ticked off this box and I'll go through it. That is not what Kumar Sangakkara would do, right? Or that is not what Brian Lara would do. They're very different levels of batting where they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to be in a defensive mode, but this ball is full and wide and I can still play through. So I think there's something slightly different there. But your general point is right. I do think there is an element of a lot of the great batters probably don't develop the way that Kumar Sangakkara has, where as you said, his father is a very important figure in this, because his father basically thinks Bradman is the only great batter and everyone else is a failure, which is an incredible thing to start from. And so he was pushed in a very a different way. And I think it meant that in Kumar's case, he was constantly trying to perfect each individual innings. Where if you compare that to Ponting starts off as a very talented player. He plays good for a few years. Then he reaches his athletic peak, where his knowledge and his athleticism sort of meld together, and he has one of the greatest peaks of any player of all time. And then it just switches off, and Ricky Ponting becomes a very ordinary batter for the back half of his career. That's the more normal thing that we see, whereas Kumar is a little bit different. But to go back to the science and the art thing before, I would say it's very similar to something like pitch curation. I'm sure there is a bunch of science, Simon, that we can look at step by step one day that we'll have information to. But at the moment, I think we have to admit that there is an element of art and luck and everything else to someone becoming a great batter. You know, Viv Richards plays across the line And that becomes a defining part of how he bats as a cricketer. And you go back and you talk to him and his brother, and they talk about how they played across the line because the school that they grew up in, if you hit the ball in the offside, the teacher wouldn't throw the woman who lived there wouldn't throw the ball back, right? And it's the same with Matt Hayden. Why was he so strong down the ground? Because, he played in a backyard that did that. That's not, I mean, there's an element of science there, but that's also just dumb luck, right? And that it suited their game, and then it allowed them to transcend who they were. So I do think there is an element of art to it as well. But yeah, certainly there's a lot of science. And the chapter that you also talked about, there's a ton of science in that one.
But it's you're, I suppose you're saying that you're, as a batter, you're the product of your environment as largely. You can adapt and you can evolve. But look at Brian Lara, for instance, brought up in Trinidad. You point out probably the greatest player of spin ever, and he learned on those sort of dusty pitches in Trinidad and dusty paddocks, and he was able to use his wrists and sort of flow through the ball and play it late. And I mean, amazing to watch, actually. I mean, Lara's is totally idiosyncratic, isn't he? And then you get Chanderpaul, another one who has kind of a completely unusual method. I once went to the Demerara River. I went up the Demerara River and I stopped off at the village where Chanderpaul was brought up. And they used to play with a rubber ball on a really rough piece of ground, which just bounced in all sorts of weird directions. So there's no way you could play off the front foot. And in fact, you were almost better off instead of being side on, being front on, because you had to react to so many weird bounces. And again, I guess that's how he got his crab-like technique.
Yeah, and Jimmy Adams talks about how Chanderpaul was almost limited by that, right? Like Jimmy Adams talks about maybe he could have been a more expansive player. He could have been a more, dramatic player all the way through. But instead, we end up in a situation where he's not like that, partly because of where he was brought up. And also, again, to go back, another very demanding father, Shiv Chanderpaul. His dad was obsessed with him being good against high pace bowling, partly probably because maybe Guyana was more spin dependent. So you've got someone who was very, very well trained in that sort of stuff. So again, there's a bit of luck, there's a bit of art, I don't know how you would talk about it, Simon, but it's not as if, even when you're mapping out a player's life in the way that Kumar Sangakkara and Shivnarine Chanderpaul had by their dads, there's still an element of that sort of chance of whatever else you would call it, of the drive within the individual. Like when you look at Shivnarine Chanderpaul, did anything matter more to him than just not going out? Like, you watch him bat, and it seems to me that everything matters about just not going out. And the amount of times I would see him, and he'd get an edge, and it would dribble along the ground to slips. I was just like, he could not be playing with any softer hands. He does not want to score a single run at this stage, right? And that to me, there is a sort of an art and a life to that is separate to just the science of, I can go through the science of, wow, he's got this open stance, which helps him against really fast bowling, but then he closes off a little bit, and it's the soft hands maybe that are more impressive about Chanderpaul. That all the science stuff is fine. Why did Chanderpaul need to face every single ball? Where compared to perhaps Aravinda de Silva, right? Who was like, I've made some runs, I had a good time, I'm off. I'll see you guys later.
It seems to me, I mean, I actually wrote some characteristics down of a successful pro batter. I mean, you've got to be a very particular type of person to want to be a pro batter because, well, the fact that your day can be one ball or it can be 6 hours. I mean, that's so weird, isn't it, in terms of your working day? So I wrote down phlegmatic, masochistic, greedy, selfish, brave, foolish, mentally tough, not too tall, idiosyncratic, a word that Yoz has already used, and able to bite your tongue as well. I mean, those are some of the things. I don't know whether you'd agree with some of those, and presumably add quite a few more to that list as well.
I wanted to. You talked about greedy, and did you say selfish or just greedy? I can't remember.
I said greedy and selfish. Yeah, I think they're two different things. Yeah.
We looked up when we were doing the research, like online lists of the most selfish players, and outside of Richard Hadley, who does come up in quite a few of them, it's basically batters. And so I was thinking, is there something within batting that makes you more greedy, right? Like, is there something, or more selfish? And think about yourself rather than, like, is it the art of batting means that you have to be selfish in a little way. You have to be in your own bubble, thinking about your own thing in a way that it doesn't appear to matter as much for bowling, or is it just the way that we perceive it? Whereas a bowler might be thinking in his head, I don't want the guy at the other end to get this wicket. I need my 5 foot. He might be thinking the exact same thing, but we don't see it. Whereas when, I talk about a Callis innings where he comes in, and I can't remember the full partnership, but it's the best opening partnership in the history of the game against Bangladesh. It's Neil McKenzie and Graham Smith. They put on this 400-run partnership. And Callis comes out against Bangladesh, who are broken and finished in this game, and he knocks around 40 not out of 120 balls. Completely oblivious to the rest of the world, right? And when I talk to people about Callis, that was one of the things they said over and over again. Like, fans often see that as a negative. Whereas cricketers are like, yeah, but you can't rattle Callis. He is going to come in and do what Callis does every single time. And there is an element of selfishness getting a not out against Bangladesh, right? When the best thing would have been to come in, if that was, I don't know, Ponting or Viv Richards, they're not going to play like Callis. They're going to come in, they're going to smack a couple of quick runs so their bowlers can go out and take some wickets and finish the game early. And so I think that is inbuilt in it. Some of the other things that you talked about, I think, are very interesting. There is a fastidiousness that I think, and Yoza is probably not a good example of this as a bowler, but I think there is a fastidiousness and an obsession that batters have that is separate to bowlers. I had one, I didn't put it in the book, but I might use it for the bowling book, where one player sort of said, and this is a player who'd done a lot of work in mental health and everything. He sort of said that batters are more autistic and bowlers are more ADHD. And I don't know enough about those two different things to know exactly what he was talking about, but I have actually met quite a few bowlers with ADHD of recent times.
I've been diagnosed with it informally.
Oh, well, there you go. So, and whereas, and he might have not been talking about it from a diagnosis point of view, although there are, as you said, you're another one. There's a few bowlers on that list, but there are different sort of mental strengths that you need in those two different things. And so I do think there is the physicality is obvious, right? Because you mentioned short people, Simon, whereas I think
I
if
said
you look
not
now,
too tall. Yeah, not too tall
Yeah.
was what I was saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that comes from the old days of cricket, right? Where when the ball was running along the ground and you had to keep the ball out as it was shooting. Whereas now, I don't think you need a not too tall player anymore. In fact, you look at Cameron Green and Zach Crawley and Matt Hayden and Clive Lloyd. I actually think being tall in modern cricket can be an advantage as much as anything else. We've seen a lot of very good tall players, but we didn't really up until World War II. Up until World War II, it was very odd to have a tall batter. So I think the pitches have changed, but there is certainly a physicality when we think of batters. Like the term "the little master" has been used for about 60 guys, right? Like Hanif Mohammed had it, Bradman had it. I've heard it used for Brad Hodge, right? Like Sachin has it. Like that is a term that we use in cricket over and over again. And even when we talk about bowlers, we quite often, like I always, my good friend Gareth Batty, he always refers to seam bowlers as the big fellas, right? Like, so we have a sort of a physical idea of the differences between them, but I think there are also mental differences between them. And I think, again, it's something I didn't talk about a lot in the book, but there is clearly something to do with eyesight, reflexes, whatever it is, fast twitch muscle fibers, because there aren't many great seam bowlers who have been good slip fielders. Right? There's a couple that I don't want to say there's never been any, but there is clearly a different physicality between the two roles.
I think it's also, it's an interesting point, actually. And listen, we'll take a quick break, actually, because there's lots more we want to talk about afterwards. But I think part of batting is about having that sort of single focus and being able to shut everything else out, whereas bowlers have to think about their field settings and what type of ball they're bowling and the pitch and how it's behaving and what the next ball. Angus Fraser made a good point, actually, on our boot room conversation the other day when he said bowlers are in control. The game doesn't start until they let go of the ball. So in a way, they're the people kind of starting the story, starting the narrative, and the batsmen have just got to react. And that enables you to have quite a narrow focus. I just wanted to say, Sunil Gavaskar, he said one of the reasons why he felt good at playing spin, and I don't think he was entirely joking, was he said, I learned to drive in India. And driving in India is a nightmare because there's so many things on the road that are unexpected. But if you just keep your path looking straight down the middle, down the road, you don't get distracted. And that's the same for batting against spin with people around the bat. Just watch the ball. Don't worry about the cows or the short legs or the silly points or the rickshaw driver veering across the road from the other direction. Just watch the ball, and that enables you to focus on the job in hand. Yes, and we'll take a quick break, and afterwards we'll continue this conversation. So, just on a general point, Jared, I sort of got the sense from reading your book that there have been, I mean, I'm generalizing a little bit here, 4 phases of batting, if we go back kind of 100 years or so. Pre-1937, where the LBW law was the ball pitching outside off stump, you couldn't be out LBW. And we can come to this, but Bradman actually exploited that very well, among others. Then after that, the loss of uncovered pitches, so pitches being covered, enabling much faster bowling and bowlers who could keep their feet and things like that, taller bowlers, etc. West Indies in the 1970s, 60s, 70s and 80s. Then DRS, obviously being brought in and changing technique. And then the final phase, which you mentioned quite a bit, actually, wobble seam, the advent of wobble seam, meaning that batters have to change again because bowlers are generally bowling more, a bit fuller to exploit the movement off the pitch rather than through the air. I mean, do you see it like that, or have I missed out a couple?
I think you missed out one. And it's just the first one, which is essentially before the wickets were made correctly. So up until 1900, cricket is a bowler's game, right? Like, it wasn't talked about that way. If you go back and read the articles, they weren't thinking about it that way. But the great early batters of the 1800s to 1850s averaged like 14, 18, and they were considered genius batters, right? And then W.G. Grace comes along, and he sort of changes the way that batting is. But the real thing that changes it in a cooperation with W.G. Grace is the fact that we have these things called muck spreaders, right? Who just allow us to, instead of putting little bits of cow crap on a wicket to make it grow, it puts a liquid on, and it means that the wickets are just flatter. So that would be the only other one I would say. But I think you're generally right. I think by the 1920s, 1930s, we had probably clocked batting as, and it's really interesting to go back and see how worried MCC was about it. Right. So we went from bowlers being in front, and then within 25 years, batters completely dominating. Like, no one could get Hobbs out. Hobbs and Sutcliffe, Hammond comes along, Bradman comes along, Headley comes along. Like, everywhere you go, there is a great batter, and there's like 2 or 3 other really good players in their side as well. And so they changed the ball, they changed the stumps, they changed the LBW. And so I think at that stage, for what the game was, and that's why Bodyline comes out of that period, right? Because the bowlers are like, what else can we do? It's pointless bowling at the stumps anymore. Let's bowl at the batters. And so I do think that is a big change. And then, yeah, you could probably lump together uncovered wickets and front foot no ball as a change, right? I think they kind of go together quite a bit, which is the wickets get harder. That, we have to have covered wickets outside of England. England is probably the place that fights for uncovered wickets longer. But also, if you're in Australia or South Africa, you can't play on an uncovered wicket because if the sun hits a wet pitch, it's death. And I say this as someone who played on uncovered wickets in Melbourne. It's just, if you face a medium pacer and suddenly you feel like you're going to die in those situations. So that had to change. And also the front foot no ball probably takes us from a slingier action, that sort of, Harold Larwood type of action, to that more Wes Hall coming over the top, right? So it helps taller bowlers come in. That brings about the West Indies and everything else. And then, as you say, the DRS, and I suppose DRS and the wobble ball kind of, again, maybe in the long history of cricket will merge a little bit. What has happened with DRS is that seam bowlers specifically have worked out that they need to bowl a lot fuller, because they need to keep all 3 dismissals in play at all times. LBW, caught behind, and bowled, right? And when you do that, it doesn't really matter if you bowl outswing, inswing, or the wobble ball. You're a much more dangerous player. And it's the same with spinners. If you go back and watch the old spinners, I've watched quite a bit of Bisham Beatty. He would quite often bowl outside of stump for long periods of time. Or he would bowl over the wicket outside leg stump, right? For periods of time. name a spinner in the world now who doesn't try and hit the stumps almost every delivery. Like, it is completely changed as an art. So DRS has definitely changed the way we think about bowling and the way that we umpire the game. So yeah, I think your general point is probably fairly accurate. And there are probably just little pockets in there where maybe things went a little bit different. So we had the wrong'un craze, right? You know, we talk about reverse swing in the 80s, wobble ball now, and if you go back to, you know, late 19, oh, sorry, 19, yeah, either side of World War One, they were actually talking about banning the wrong'un because no one could play it, right? Which is a ridiculous thing to think of now, but that's how dominant it was. And Bosanquet had to come out and say, and I think he wrote a national apology for the wrong'un, right? So we have had little periods where a delivery or a style has dominated. And the only other thing I would say is that pre-World War II era that you just talked about, it was probably pretty much everywhere outside of Asia. And we didn't have a lot of Asian cricket at that time, but everywhere outside of Asia was pretty much 50-50 pace and spin. And since World War II, we just see more pace in Australia, in South Africa, in New Zealand, in England. It comes on. So there was a time when uncovered wickets were around, when you really needed a great spinner there in case there was any rain. And also uncovered wickets are more helpful and more beneficial to spinners even when there isn't rain. Now, in those other places, it's changed a little bit. But yeah, you're pretty much spot on with the major sort of themes, I think, there.
What about shot innovation as well? I mean, that seems. I mean, has there always been shot innovation? You think the influence of white ball cricket now on the game, on Test cricket as well? You know, reverse sweep, whatever, ramp scoop, whatever, all those shots. I mean, has there always been that shot innovation throughout 150 years?
Yeah, well, I think the big boom is really W.G. Grace. Like, he's remembered as this sort of cartoon character, old legend, right? But actually, as a technician, he's far more important to the game of cricket, because until W.G. Grace comes along, you were either a front foot player or a back foot player, which meant was you basically camped on the front foot and you didn't have any back foot shots, or you camped on the back foot and you didn't have any front foot shots. And W.G. Grace went, well, wait a minute, if this guy pitches here, I want to be forward. And if this guy wants to go back, and that might have been subconscious. So he starts that. And from there, we have this innovation of shots and batsmanship, or however you want to put it, of different skills that come through. And you get little things like the draw shot, which we now, in modern cricket is the nutmeg, right? But the draw shot actually existed way back in the 1800s at a time when it probably made sense, mostly for left-handers, because the bowlers couldn't bowl accurately at left-handers. And you didn't want to intentionally hit the ball on the leg side because that was seen as ungentlemanly.
That's an extraordinary thing, Jared, actually, isn't it? That actually hitting the ball on the leg side used to be seen as like not the thing to do. It's incredible, actually, isn't it, to think that?
Yeah, and so you have... really, the draw shot is almost like there's nothing else I can do, and I'm going to hit the ball between the stumps and take it to the leg side. Or if the ball was down on the leg side and there was nowhere else to hit it, you would hit it there. And then, so you have that sort of, I suppose, the combination of Ranji, and Ranji might be another one, actually, Simon, of like someone like Kumar Sangakkara, who probably had great batting talent, but kept working on his game and working how to be better over a long period of time. And one of the big things Ranji was he was afraid of the ball. And so he needed a shot that would stop him from backing away because he wasn't used to playing with a hard ball. And so he comes up with this leg glance, which he can play off middle and leg stump, which, as Simon just said, was not a thing that people did. If the ball went to fine leg before, it was because the bowler had bowled it in that direction. Now you had players taking the ball off their stumps and guiding it down there. And then you have Victor Trumper, who essentially goes, well, it doesn't matter where they bowl the ball. I want to hit it on the leg side. Right? Victor Trumper is probably the first guy who exploits the field and goes, well, there's 6 guys on this side and there's 3 on this side. I'm just going to hit it over there. And it's one of the reasons I think that Victor Trumper's legend is so high, is because that would have been revolutionary if no one had ever done something like that before. And we see little things like, we hear of stories of Leary Constantine talks about in his book a shot that is kind of like a scoop that he played. And we obviously have early stories of switch hits and reverse sweeps, which are really, really interesting considering it takes another 100 years. In fact, those happened about 100 years before Mike Gatting played the ball in the 87 World Cup final and ruined the reverse sweep for about 5 years. And so you get these little stories, and then eventually I think what happens is we have the premeditated shots. And I think that's the really interesting change in batting, which comes about from the Muhammad brothers. They're both credited with inventing the reverse sweep. I'm not sure which one of them actually did, but they're both credited with that shot. And that is a shot.
Oh, that's Hanif Mohammed and Mushtaq Mohammed, right?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, all the Muhammad brothers. Yozo has seen me play and will know that I'm obsessed with the reverse sweep and will play it any chance I get. I absolutely love this shot. But
I'm certain
why
to
I love
relay it. I tried it once against Derek Underwood in about 1982 and lost my off stump, and that's the last time I
yeah,
tried it.
But did you
I mean, if I
practice it
No,
before you played it?
no.
No, that's the point, isn't it?
I
They
don't
all
think anyone had
practice
ever
it now.
seen it before, actually. I think I might have seen Mushtaq Mohammed play it on a Sunday League game or something once. And
it wasn't that even when those guys played it, it was very rare that they would play it. But that shot to me is important for two reasons, because it goes back to the Victor Trumper idea of how do I exploit the field? And it takes it a step further because it is a premeditated shot, right? It is very hard to play a reverse sweep if you haven't made that decision beforehand. And that opens up a whole world of shots, right? We then see Douglas Marillier, Ryan Campbell, Tilakratny Dilshan with their 3 different versions of lap scoops, whatever you want to call them. And we now have, all different kinds of shots that come out of that. The ability to sweep a fast bowler, again, it has to be a premeditated thing. You can't make that decision. Even we had people who would run down. I think Dennis Compton occasionally would run down at Seamus. So it's not that we never had that before, but from the reverse sweep onwards, we get, Dean Jones is a perfect example of that. And then we get all these different players who are using their feet to quick bowlers and everything else. Again, a premeditated thing. The actual shots, you're like this, Simon. I tried to look up the history of the sweep shot. And I talked to all these different historians, and they were like, if you think about it, cricket probably started as underarm. So the sweep shot, one way or another, every time you bowled an underarm ball that went down the leg side was probably a natural shot. So there is no one ever wrote down, this is the first sweep shot, or this is the period of time and when the sweep shot came in. And it's the same with most shots. We have one maybe apocryphal story about the first forward defense ever being played in the late 1700s. We don't really have a very good, accurate description of when all the different shots get played. And so, in that way, we have to then, we're a bit luckier with the more extreme batting, the reverse sweeps and the laps and scoops,
just to
because
pick
they
up on
weren't
that. I mean, I suppose we talked about the phases of batting over the generations. Maybe one thing we didn't mention there was the advent of helmets, which has enabled those ramp shots and even those reverse sweeps in a way. I mean, some of the reverse sweeps are played with, the head very close to the ground and the face right in front of the ball without a visor. Those shots would have been very risky. And I saw many batsmen being hit in the face before helmets or before visors. And, hooking and obviously ramping and things like that would never have been considered, really. We can develop that perhaps in the second episode about helmets. But do you think that was a consideration as well in terms of the evolution of shots?
Yeah, I think the pads changed cricket forever. If we didn't put pads on, what kind of game would cricket be? We probably wouldn't have overarm bowling, right? Like if we hadn't have gone to that, and there was a big fight between it. So pads invent modern cricket batting, and then the next step is the helmet, because there isn't really much between those two.
When were pads, Jared?
1840s,
So the
was
pads, 1840s, 1850s, I think, where there's a couple of players. Was it Alfred Min who had his leg smashed up and he was considered a great batter? And then pad play, you're like this, Simon, we invent the pads, but pad play doesn't really become a thing until about 30 or 40 years later. So it still takes a little while, and it's probably the same with helmets. The helmets become a thing in, Yozo might be more, might know more about this than I have, but I've just done a documentary on Kerry Packer. Essentially, helmets come out of the Kerry Packer thing, because Kerry Packer just keeps hiring fast bowlers on Australian wickets, and they weren't good pitchers either, because they were manufacturing the wickets, and they had all the best fast bowlers in the world. But if you think about what Yozo just said about the way we play short pitch bowling, it probably changes 20 years after that. It doesn't change straight away. Yeah. People they've got their helmet on, so it takes that time. But those are two huge evolutions. Whereas, I don't think chest pads, thigh pads, good gloves really changed batting all that much. But pads and helmets have a huge impact, and the way that we see batting now would not exist without those two things.
So, Jared, fascinating book. It's out on May the 8th. Just give us one explanation of your top 50. What was the criteria for great batters?
Making runs.
Okay. Well, in that case, I have to... Okay, so making runs. So in which case, I'm going to reveal one thing. Graham Gooch is not in your top 50. Now, he is the leading run maker of all time in professional cricket. and he's not in your list, in your top 50.
No.
Shall we hear the answer next time? Shall we leave it on a cliffhanger? Because I have a few questions about players who are not in, for example, like Barry Richards. So let's leave that for next time.
Okay.
Okay. So we've talked generally about the art of, and to some extent the science of batting today, and we've looked at some of the reasons why the game has changed and why batting has changed. In the next episode, we're going to talk to Jared very specifically about his top 50 batters, and we'll look at his top 10 and his top 3, and I'm sure you'll all have your ideas out there about who should be in and who is not in. Well, all will be revealed next time. So thanks very much for listening. Thanks to Jared, and join us around about early May for the release of the second episode of The Art of Batting.